welcome back for those of you that came last time. Last session, 2 weeks ago, we kind of laid a foundation of community outreach, or what we can just call outreach. The key points to remember from the first course or the first class was that outreach is not evangelism proper, and outreach is not missions proper, but outreach is missional, and our actions and the way that we interact with the people or the environment that we are serving in is our testimony. And so when I say evangelism proper, I mean we aren't going in there to evangelize people with the word, right? We aren't going in and saying, let me sit down and talk to you about Jesus Christ. We should be reflecting Jesus Christ. That should be our testimony. If we earn the right to share the gospel with somebody that we've formed a relationship with, then at that point, obviously, we always would share the gospel. But our actions and our deeds should be reflective of the gospel. That should be the testimony in an outreach context. We also talked about some of the higher level things that we need to be careful of or mindful of. In today's class, we're going to dig down on those, and we're going to learn a little more about what it means to serve well and to serve faithfully inside of a marginalized or underserved community. All right. So I know this group does not like questions, but just so I can kind of gauge, how many people know what an ethnography is? Okay. Just one? Two? Well, yeah, I know you know. Okay. So an ethnography is a type of research, actually, but it is used in missions a lot of the times, oftentimes, and it is used in outreach for those that do outreach right. What an ethnography is it's basically a study in context. And researchers, when it's used in research, what you would do is actually immerse yourself in a group, right? And then observe that group. And because you're immersed in the group, you gain a deep understanding of their traditions, their values, their beliefs, and just their manners, right? Customs, etc. And so it's our job when we go into a community that is not like ours, right, to understand it at that level. That's how we protect. That's how we protect them and ourselves from doing things that are actually harmful rather than helpful. Because we might think something's helpful, but it could be very harmful in their context or their culture. And so it's critical that we orient ourselves that way, to say that we are going in as learners first, primarily, and then as servants secondary, right? Because, well, really, I mean, if you go in as a learner, you are going in as a servant, because we're trying to understand their cultures, their customs, and their values, their ways, etc. All right, and so with that, just keep that in mind, and let's talk about what we're going to do today is talk about the ethics and the pitfalls in practice. So how we are not going to harm, why we are helping, okay? All right, so we have to remember, and we touched on this last week, good intentions are not enough. We have to really understand what we're doing. We have to have careful reflection, and on top of ethnography, the careful reflection would be that we would work with one another and try to evaluate what we are going to go and do, how we are going to help, how are we going to serve. Pray about that, and then through confirmation would come through one another, hearing the same answers in prayer, other people that we might ask in the church, etc. We'll know if we're going down the right road. Oftentimes we, just as Christians, are very willing to help, and we see a need and we want to go fill that need. And we say, God, should I go fill this need? Yes, you should go fill this need. And we don't ask anybody or don't discern, and we just go and fill the need. And then we realize in retrospect that maybe that wasn't the best thing for us to do. I shared last time a couple of the struggles I had early on, especially with prison ministry, because I feel like they're just so, they're so behind the curve that they kind of need a little more help, and that's the wrong way to look at things, right? But it's very difficult, but it is, sometimes love is hard, and what we think might not be loving is actually more loving than what we think would be loving, right? And so, and especially in today's society and the way that this society's just become, right? If you love me, you'll love me as I am, but yes, to a degree, but we don't want to love one another to death, right? And I mean by that I mean a spiritual death, right? I'm not going to sit and watch a brother or a sister live in sin and rebellion and not say anything about it, right? And at the same time, I don't also want to enable those types of activities, right? And so think of a good example is the drug addict, right? Begging on the street, and God commands us to be generous, but if I know I'm going to give $20 to a drug addict and that drug addict's going to go and spend the $20 on drugs, am I really helping that drug addict or am I hurting that drug addict? I would argue I'm hurting the drug addict, right? And so that can be, that can manifest itself in a lot of ways, not just a drug addict, but if you're creating dependent pathways, pathways of dependency, then you are hurting and harming that community, okay? And we talked about that last week. So anyway, the good intentions aren't enough, and we have to reflect. We have to make sure, are we reinforcing, or are we not reinforcing dependency? That's number one. We have to make sure we do not reinforce dependency. We don't want to switch one model for another model, and we don't want to switch one source for another source. Number two, we have to make sure that we are not stripping people of their dignity. Okay? And that can be something as simple, I think I used last time, was the, I'm going to go to Guatemala and paint houses. That's not very dignified for people that know how to paint houses. Why would we have to come down there to paint their house, right? And then we don't want to deepen any wounds. And that's where the ethnography is critical, because we really need to understand what's going on in that community. And one of the things that I think everyone knows by now is we're looking at Clarkston, which is a refugee community. And the refugees, they have their own set of struggles and challenges as a refugee community, but within that community, it's very diverse. We're not going to necessarily, just say, oh, we're just going to deal with refugees from the Sudan. There could be refugees from all over the world. And each of them are going to have unique subsets of, cultural challenges or assimilation challenges, et cetera. And so we have to be very, very in tune with that. The good thing to know is we're not going to be alone. We're going to partner with somebody in this ministry, the Friends of Refugees, and they have been in that community for dozens of years, and we will be working side by side with them. We'll be getting to know them. We'll be learning with them. And so this will be ongoing. These classes, you're not going to just have 3 classes and go out. As much as Joseph, my wife turned to me and said, no pressure. And I love my brother Joseph, but I am not going to teach you how to be outreach experts in 3 classes. There's just no way. And I'm not an outreach expert, right? I have experience, but I'm always learning. And so we have other people that will help us learn, and we will learn together and grow together. And so we'll have more of these sessions probably at 201, at 301. But the other sessions will be more contextualized to exactly what we're doing. This is just kind of a high level, I'm teaching you the foundation, okay? All right, so the first thing that's critical to understand, especially for all of us, is what is called power dynamic and positionality, okay? And power dynamics can be financial, they can be social, they can, and what a power dynamic is that our status or our perceived status in society creates a power distance. And in some cultures, there's high power distance, and in some cultures, there's low power distance. In refugee communities, we will often deal with what's called high power distance. And so the perception and the how they perceive us is even greater than it truly is. We are all educated here, or being educated, right? We all, I think, are at the very least middle class, right? Some of us have more than others, but we're all, I know you college kids are poor, but you're not really poor, right? So the thing is that when this community comes here, they could have been affluent, they could have come here and they could have lost everything or had to leave everything. So sometimes, like I said, the power distance might not be as great, but it's still there in their context right now today. And we have to be mindful of that. So the minute that we walk into that situation, we are already perceived as having power, having something that they need. And we cannot be the source of we can't be the source of that need, right? We can help facilitate, we can work to help them gain that need in their context, but we cannot become the sole source of that need. The second thing is the positionality is the way that our background and our privileges affect our interactions, okay? And so for one of the things, and I'll pick on myself here, one of the things that I had to realize early on was that in the prisons, you might know this, the ratios, although now they're shifting because of the methamphetamines and things like that, that's a more white drug, but the demographics are shifting, but it's largely black and brown people in prison. And so me being white, there's a positionality there. And you can't understand because these things wouldn't happen to you, right? And so let's say, like, I look at a crime, somebody that's black, they get arrested for armed robbery, let's say, okay? And then I'm white, I get arrested for armed robbery, okay? And I'm me, I'm John right now. Yeah, I can afford a really good lawyer. I know people, I know judges, I could probably, I don't know that I'd get away with it, but I definitely would not get the sentence this person's gonna get. And so that's the other thing that we have to be mindful of, is that our position, we might look at this and say, oh, well, this is an easy fix, or I could get out of this, or I would never find myself in this position. Yeah, you probably wouldn't because of the privileges and who you are and what you have access to, right? We have access to resources. They don't. And so that's one of the things we have to be really mindful of. And it's very hard because even the way that we talk or even the way that we interact with one another around them can alienate us. And so we have to be really mindful. And so think about, like, okay, when I talk to you college kids, right? I asked one of you that was leaving today, he had on the Oilers jersey. I'm a huge hockey fan, so I said to him, I'm like, are you an NHL fan, or is that just a fashion statement? And I realized that fashion statement is also interchangeable with drip, because he said, it's just my drip. So I said, okay. Well, if you guys invited me to have, like, come into your community, everything, and then you used all your nomenclatures, all your words and stuff, I would feel alienated. I'd be like, I have no idea what these people are talking about. Do they have a problem with their plumbing? I have no clue. So, but it's that type of thing where we have to be really mindful. And so my wife and I, another example is my wife and I, when we sometimes talk, people will ask us about financial advice. Well, we're both IBs, right? Investment bankers. We know all the nomenclature. We talk about, ROI and things that we understand, but they don't understand. And so we have to be mindful of that. And that's another part of ethnography, right? How do we, if we have a concept or we have something that we're trying to share, or we have advice or whatever it is, we have to contextualize that into a way that they can understand it, not just that we can understand it among ourselves, right? Okay, so let's see. Okay, So this is an example that I wrote down too with the positionality and the power dynamics. And we talked a little bit about this last week, but it's just important to reiterate. So what we're doing now, and I know a lot of you have talked to us about, getting involved, we are being careful in how we're approaching this, because what we need to do is, one, be sure that our church can handle what we're going to do with Friends of Refugees. Two, be sure our church can stay committed to what we might want to do with Friends of Refugees. And then three, make sure our church is equipped and resourced to do what we're being asked to do. And we want to understand what the needs are there. We don't want to invent the need. And that was the example of, imagine us just going into that community and starting a soup kitchen. And there's no need for a soup kitchen, right? And so we had good intentions, but it alienated us because, number one, it insulted them. They have food. Let's say that they have food, right? And number two is they know how to cook food. So why would they need a soup kitchen? They're not homeless. They have homes. They might need food, but they don't need a soup kitchen. Do you see the difference? So we got to be very careful in what we're doing. And so what we call a way forward with that is what's called reflexivity. And what that is, it's constantly examining ourselves and asking, how does my position shape this relationship, my relationship? So how does my position shape the relationship? If I'm the one that's leading these kind of efforts and I'm saying to myself, oh, I'm going to do this and they need this and they need this, think about how that's shaping the relationship, right? There's a term, how many are familiar with the term colonialism, right? You've all heard of that. That's colonialism, thinking that we know best and we have everything that they need, because we do not know best and we probably don't have everything that they need. And then you have to ask yourself, am I using my power to dominate or empower others? And that's a very nuanced shift, but it's very critical. We can use our position and our power, right, our status, our education, we can use it to empower others, or we can use it to dominate others, right? And so a good example is me standing up here. I'm using my education and my experience to empower all of you. I'm not trying to lead you. I'm not trying to tell you what to do, right? I'm just giving you the information that you would need should you choose to come into a community with us and do outreach, right? And so that's empowerment. I'm giving you the tools. And that's what we want to do when we go into communities. Give people tools and give people, create pathways to independence. All right. So some of the, and one of the things I want to say too is next week we're going to do how to build and sustain a healthy outreach ministry, because something that dawned on me last week and this week, it seems like this is a lot of like negative, like what, okay, JT's always telling us what not to do, but I get it. But the reason that we start with what not to do is if you ask a major league baseball player how he hits home runs, he can't tell you, but he can tell you how he doesn't hit home runs. He knows everything wrong with his swing that disallows a home run, but they can't articulate exactly what works. And so that's why we start with what not to do, right? Because it's very hard to say what to do. What is successful outreach? But we're going to touch on it next week. So with that harmful helping, right? Common missteps. So we're going to just talk about some of the more frequent ethical mistakes, and this goes to the ethics of outreach. Number one is stigmatizing and labeling. So when we reduce people to a label, the homeless, the addicts, the needy, we fail to see them as whole persons, and this can strip away dignity and reinforce shame. And so we want to be very, very careful. I'm more mindful of this than most, and the reason is even, I don't even like the word marginalized. I think underserved might be a better word, and I know in today's society we also have this, everything's politicized. This has nothing to do with politics. It's just language, right? And we just need to be careful about our language. The refugee community, they know that they're coming here. They understand they're in a new world, and they understand that they need access to resources and those types of things, but they are whole people. They're intelligent, they have gifts, they're just like all of us, right? They might not thrive in certain places, but they will thrive in other places. And so we just need to be mindful that these are just not people that need our help, right? They are people that are new here. They need to have friendships. They need to build their networks. They need to build a community just like we do. The second thing is conditional aid. So some ministries will say, we will help you if you attend our service, or we'll help you if you stop certain behaviors. And while accountability is important, conditional aid can become coercive. So God's love is freely given. Our care should reflect that grace. We shouldn't set conditions. And one of the things that, if you were here last time, you might say, well, wait a second, you set a condition on the rent that you paid for your friend Smiley. That is different. Okay, what I mean is, I didn't say to Smiley, if I will pay your rent if you do X, Y, and Z, right? I'm saying in one specific context, he needs to go out and at least make the attempt, right? And then that is a hand up, not a handout. I'm not just going to pay his rent. I also wasn't asking for a different behavioral condition, right? It was, hey, you need to make money, you got to at least try to make the rent, and I will pay the shortfall or the rent, right? And so that was a deal that was in line with what I call like my core value of giving a hand up rather than a handout. But if I had said to Smiley, hey, you need to go to community college if you want me to pay your rent, or you need to go and work at this place if you want me to pay your rent, or whatever it is, that's something different. That's conditional. And what we're saying here is that no matter what we're doing, because we're not going to deal one-on-one, we're going to deal with the community. And so I know of homeless shelters in Atlanta that are Christian-based homeless shelters. You can get soup if you sit through a sermon. That's conditional. Why would they have to sit through a sermon to get a bowl of soup? If you want to feed the homeless, feed the homeless. Don't make it conditional. That's the bad example of it, okay? The other one is charity theater. Outreach becomes about us. And I don't know about Kayla, but seriously, if I ever see anybody do this, I would probably ask you never to come back. It's not selfies and social media posts, okay? We're not charity theater. We're not there to be, what's up with, I'm serving with refugees and this and that. This happens on the mission field all the time. It's with short-term missions, right? And we all fall subject to it. And so, but yeah, we do not want to do that. This is like exploitative, because it's almost like we're wanting to, we want to gain our own sympathy because we're out here in the trenches with these poor people. And again, you're doing so much harm in doing that. And Jesus warned us in Matthew 6:1, beware of practicing your righteousness before others and letting them see it, right? Our service to communities and our outreach service should be just that. There shouldn't be anything more than that. If we're not compelled to do it because of the way Jesus loved us, and there's some ulterior motive there, pray through that and talk with one another about it, talk to us about it. There could be, right, another motive, but let's work through that and talk through that. All right, the fourth thing, neglecting long-term impact. So what we need to do is, this, again, I use soup kitchens a lot because people do a lot with food. They think, I guess food's the answer. But a long-term, if people are truly hungry, then what's really the long-term need in that? Right? Hunger's the immediate. What's the long-term need? Food security, okay? And so how would our program address the short-term need, which is hunger, but how are we going to develop it and strategically plan for food security at the end of whatever we're trying to do? And so we always want that further outcome in mind, all right, when we do this. That's what we're trying to do now as a committee. We're trying to think, okay, this would be great to go in here. It would be great because we have a heart for these people, right? And we know we have relationships there. We know it's a good ministry. But what's the long-term goal of our church? Right? What is the long-term goal? What are we going to try and help move them towards? Which would be independence ultimately, but what part are we going to play in that pathway to independence? Right? And yes, there's immediate and there's long-term needs, and a good program should address both, but never stop at just the short term, because then it's a Band-Aid on the larger problem. So, and then uncoordinated duplication. When we ignore local organizations already at work, we create competition, confusion, redundancy. So instead of partnering, we waste resources. We're not doing that, obviously. We are looking to partner, and that's one of the reasons we're looking to partner. Now, if we all as a church found a neighborhood or a community or something that needed resources that weren't being given in that community, and we built that would be okay. But we'd have to build it with intentionality, and we'd have to really define, again, what are the short-term needs that we're going to address, and how are we're going to alleviate those long-term. And then this is the most important, I think. I saved it for last. The biggest mistake we can make is neglecting self-care, because I think just sitting in last class and up to this point in this class, you can see this is kind of challenging, and we're always having to check in with ourselves, one another, to make sure, we're not doing harm, we're not doing anything that could further, further the dependency that maybe is already existing where we're serving. That takes a toll on us. And also, we are going to see people in outreach ministry that, again, yes, it's a refugee community, but they might have a lot of other problems in that community, right? We are going to see hardship. We're going to see challenges we're probably not used to seeing or facing. We're going to feel lost at times. We're going to feel helpless at times. And we really need to take care of one another, but it's your job to take care of yourself too, right? And so don't neglect the self-care. And really pray about getting into this kind of ministry, because once you do it, you have to be in for the long haul, right? And so prison, it was interesting, COVID hit, and I wasn't allowed to go in anymore. And that kind of was an understanding with everybody, right? But I had equipped enough people inside of the prison to handle the ministry without me being in there, which thank God I did. And I don't go back like I used to serve. I would serve every week, 3 days a week. I don't do that anymore. But the ministry is continued, right? Because I thought about the long-term impact. And so we have to think about that too. For your college kids, do we want you to get involved? Yes, and we're going to figure out ways to do it. But if you know you're going to go back home or move away, you only have a year or two or whatever you can commit, we all need to be honest about that and realize that, hey, what would be the best thing for someone that is only going to be here a year? What would be the best service area for them, right? Because relationally, once you start to build these relationships, if Pastor Young is just moved here and he needs help and whatever, he just wants to build networks and this and that, open opportunities, then I'm going to befriend Pastor Young, then I better stay and be Pastor Young's friend, right? I don't want to abandon Pastor Young midway. So that's another thing. All right, so the ethical principles for outreach and how do we avoid the pitfalls. So let's do scripture and ethical frameworks together. And that's another thing, remember I talked about last week, when we get into these ministries, especially when we're working with other groups, these are not all PCA people. There's a lot of different denominations and a lot of different worldviews. And so we have to be sensitive to that. But one, do no harm. So like medicine, outreach must start here. Do no harm. Ask, could my action create unintended harm? It's that simple. That's the ethical framework. Is what I'm about to do, or can what I'm about to do create unintentional harm? If you don't know, ask somebody. Proverb says, Desire without knowledge is not good, and whoever makes haste with his feet misses his way. So that's the same with do no harm, right? All right, so consent and agency. People should be able to choose how they are helped. If I'm coming in again with the preconceived ideas or notions of this is the way people need to be helped, then I'm wrong. I'm not doing a good job. People should dictate that. And one of the things that we would do, or I would do, I guess, in the prison, is I formed a leadership committee, and those guys got to tell me how to direct the ministry, what they wanted to learn, what topics they thought were important, that type of thing. It's their world, right? I'm just coming into their context, so they dictated to me what they needed, not what I needed. And if I couldn't give it, then I just was honest about that. I just can't do that. I don't have the resources, or I don't have the skill set, or whatever it might be. So, Jesus, he often asked, right? If we look throughout Scripture, what did Jesus say before he helped somebody? What do you want me to do? He didn't say, how can I help you? But like, what do you want me to do for you, right? So let's be like Jesus in that way. Consent and agency. Then justice and fairness. We must go beyond charity to address fairness. Micah 6:8 reminds us, what does the Lord require of you but to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God? And so we need to also understand that if we're going to do for one in the group, we need to figure out how are we going to do it for all. And the reason you want that is because we can start to favor certain people or certain things. And again, because I only know my history and my story, I want to tell you, like, this doesn't happen perfectly. In the beginning in prison, I obviously liked some prisoners better than other prisoners, right? But that started to show a little bit, and I had to really check myself. And I remember one day I gave a tablet, not an electronic tablet, but a paper tablet, to one of the guys, and then everybody in the dorm wanted one. And I knew right then and there I wasn't ever going to make the mistake again, but now I had to get everybody a tablet, and I had to go get everybody a tablet, right? Because what you do for one, you have to do for all, especially in prison for some reason. So, justice and fairness. Next, stewardship. The resources belong to God. We must use them wisely and transparently, right? And that's 1 Peter 4:10. And so when we have resources or we have skills or talents or this or that, we need to remember that we're just stewards of those things. I like to say that if you think about it, the only person in all of creation that can rightly and truly say the word mine is Jesus Christ. Because we know in Matthew, right, everything that came into existence, came through the word, right, came through the Son. So nothing in this world is ours. It's just given to us so we can steward it. And we have to be wise and we have to be transparent with our gifts and our time and our talent, but we need to steward it. We need to give it away. And then sustainability and capacity building. Instead of doing everything ourselves, we train and empower local people. Paul modeled this by raising up leaders in every community rather than centralizing power in himself. How many people ever worked for somebody that the only person you could talk to was that person? You couldn't talk to anybody else in the organization. If that's ever happened to you, you know how frustrating that is. It's centralized power. And it's really bad. And it causes a lot of problems. The other interesting thing, so I was in Desert Storm, and the only objective in Desert Storm was get Saddam Hussein, because every single order had to go through him. And if he was taken out, the army couldn't function. And everyone knew that. And so that's what centralized power can do. I know that's a little drastic of a, analogy, but it is true. Think about it. I can't be that's why immediately when Pastor Young and I talked about this, I was like, I want to bring Kayla aboard. I want somebody else with me. I don't want to lead this. I want to co-lead it, and I want a somebody that's different from me, which male and female, right? So we have different perspectives and different ways that we look at the world, and that's very healthy and very good. And we're not going to have any kind of centralized control in this. And we don't want it. And the other thing is that we don't want to, Kayla and I don't want to do everything either. We want to empower other people to do things. And then when you guys are empowered, we want to all go down into this community, and wherever we decide to serve, we want to empower them to do it. We want to work ourselves out of a job, okay? And so our ministry in Tanzania, over in Africa, we had set 10 years, and we did it. We had said, in 10 years, we don't want to have to be there anymore. We don't want this ministry dependent on outside money, Western money, and we don't want this ministry dependent upon our leadership. And in 10 years, and what the blessing was, what we didn't realize that happened was, so our ministry over there was targeted at street youth, and these street youths would literally grow up in what's called wards, which here would be ghettos. They would grow up in these wards, and they'd have two paths. And the path most took was to the gangs. And then once you're in that world, you're in a lot of trouble. And so we would try to take them off the street, give them alternative education that was funded and paid for, and then that eventually evolved into what we're doing today. But what was really cool about it is last year when we did, it was either last year or the year before, we did our audit, and we realized that everybody in the leadership position, including the executive director now of that ministry, was street youth. They came through our program, and some of them stayed and some of them did internships, and now they all run it. And it's all fully funded by just what we call, income generation projects, but just microfinancing and little businesses that we built fund that whole thing. And so it works really well also because if 3 of us went over there to run it, we would have to have outside money because we couldn't pay ourselves what we would need. And so this is another thing. In certain contexts, it's a lot more economically viable to accomplish what you want to accomplish, right? So that's the other thing, is that think about sustainability and capacity building when we are doing these types of things. And then reciprocity and dignity. Outreach is not a one-way transaction. We also learn, grow, and receive from those who we serve. 1 Corinthians 12:22 reminds us the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And so don't miss the lesson in the outreach and the service that you do. My journey and my sanctification and everything, I got to a point in my life where I felt like I was living in 2 worlds. I was in the world and I was in the kingdom. And I knew I had to go all into the kingdom. And I said a prayer about that and just said, God, I don't care what you have to do to me to conform me more in the image of your son. Just do it. Whatever it may be, do it. And then I don't even think I made it 24 hours till I went back and said, oh, God, one thing, please don't put me in prison, and please don't take my wife away. But do anything else to conform me to the image of your son. And what was funny was, after that prayer, shortly after, I had gotten an invitation to work with Mission to the World on their team, their global training and development team. So I was gone 45 days at a time. Then I would be home for 20 or 30 days. Then I'd be gone for 45 days at a time. So I started traveling a lot. And then when I was on home assignment, I got into the prison ministry. And I told you I was in there for 3 days a week for 4 years, 4 or 5 years. And after that, I realized, oh, wow, God took me away from my wife, but not permanently. And God put me in prison, but not permanently. But I started to reflect on the lessons in both areas. And I realized that, and I've told Pastor Young this, I've grown more spiritually, in the spiritual gifts. I've grown more from prison ministry than any other thing I've ever done in my life. It's insane how much my empathy grew, my compassion grew, my patience grew, my understanding of just others grew. It just was a beautiful thing that happened in a place that I did not want to go, right? But needed to go in the way that God did that for me to grow to where I am today. And so don't miss the opportunity for your own sanctification and your own growth, because that's what I say. Another thing I always tell people, and you all know I have my doctorate, I would trade all my degrees for more stamps in my passport. I think I learn more traveling and immersing myself in different cultures than I do ever declaratively with a degree program. And so don't miss the opportunity here. And we can travel the world in Clarkston. That's what's awesome about it. Like, there are so many different ethnicities and just cultures and cool things there that you can literally tour the world, because we'll get to sit with these people, hopefully dine with these people, and build community with these people. All right. So, biblical insights in God's way of caring. The Bible shows us what not hurting looks like. Jesus elevated the marginalized. When he spoke with the Samaritan woman in John 4, he didn't shame her. He listened, engaged, and revealed himself to her. In Matthew 20, Jesus rebuked power-hungry disciples, teaching that greatness comes through service. Our outreach must reflect the servant leadership, not dominance. And Isaiah 58 warns against superficial charity, fasting while ignoring justice. God is not impressed with optics. He desires justice, mercy, and authentic love. So again, this goes back to the difference between theater outreach and biblical outreach. God's pattern is clear. True care restores dignity, empowers, and enters into relationship. All right, so I have a little case study, but just for the sake of time, I'm just going to tell you the lesson of the case study. The quick overview of the case study, there was a study done, and they compared secular and faith-based approaches to homeless outreach. And the findings actually showed that while faith-based groups brought the most compassion and resources, they lacked coordination and intentionality. Okay? And so the lesson in it was that compassion must be paired with strategy. Listening, collaboration, long-term planning are essential if we want to avoid harm. All right? So, some questions that you can ask before launching the outreach, and we've launched the outreach. We actually went over these questions. I think the first meeting we ever had with Kayla and Eric and I, we asked about this. So, have we listened to community members and leaders? Yes, we have. Are we duplicating existing services or partnering with them? We're planning on partnering. Have we considered long-term sustainability? Yes. Are we reinforcing stereotypes or empowering dignity? We're hopefully going to empower dignity. That is our intention. Do we have accountability measures? Yes. And are we practicing humility, being open to correction and change? Yes, we are, because we are all accountable to one another, and we will be accountable to whoever is leading our outreach efforts in Clarkston with Friends of Refugees. So, hopefully today's lesson has shown us that helping without wisdom can hurt, that outreach must be guided by the awareness of our power, even though it's perceived, right? Careful ethics and a commitment to dignity and justice. As Christians, we reflect Christ when we serve, not as rescuers, but as co-laborers and friends, walking with, not over, those who are marginalized. Next week, we'll talk about the practical competencies. So that'll be the proactive stuff. We'll talk about listening, asset mapping, partnership, and sustainable design. All right? Does anyone have any questions? Okay. And there will be more training as we go along. Pastor Young and I have discussed this. And Kayla is going to start to train on our 201 or whatever we call the next block of it. And then we will have specific training, obviously, when we go into the community and we start our outreach. Look for short-term opportunities now. We've talked about this, especially around Thanksgiving and Christmas. Don't neglect some short-term ways that we can help. Kayla did a food drive, and maybe there's some other things we can go do as a church together, even if it's just a few people. But there's always opportunities to serve. We just want to make sure that the opportunities we choose, again, are not harming anybody. And be in prayer, please. A couple of you have asked about being on committee. We are going to invite people onto the committee once we figure out exactly what we're going to do and what our needs are. And if you have any questions at any point or just want to talk further, just let Kayla and I know, and or Eric, and we can try to schedule some time and talk with all of you. Okay? All right, thank you. You want to close us out? Yeah.
Lord, thank you, Lord, once again for the opportunity to be your hands and your feet. Thank you, Lord, for JT, Lord, and the wisdom that they shared with us. Give us wisdom, Lord, in terms of where to serve, how to serve. May we be people, Lord, who love well like you, Jesus, love your people. Be with us as we go.